The glass walls of the Innovation Command Center reflected the harsh glow of a dozen screens, each one pulsing with error codes like a heartbeat in distress. Beyond the walls, the city slept under a calm blanket of midnight haze, but inside the tension was anything but calm. 7 teams of specialists, each wearing matching branded jackets, clustered around a circular table cluttered with open laptops, tangled cords, and half-drunk cups of cold coffee. At the head of the table, a man stood so still he seemed carved from the same steel and glass as the room itself. Benjamin Stroud. Billionaire. Founder. The name carried weight, but tonight even his presence did not calm the chaos. He watched in silence as his top systems architect tried and failed again to explain why a simple calibration module refused to run the final test cycle. A thin bead of sweat traced down the side of the architect's temple as he gestured helplessly at the biggest screen. On it, rows of green lines turned red every 3 seconds. Every failure cost them millions by the minute. One consultant from the 3rd team, his tie loosened and voice cracking, spoke up. "We've cross-checked the entire mainframe. If we attempt a bypass now, we'll compromise the data chain. The risk is catastrophic." Benjamin's gray eyes shifted from the screen to the man's face. And the alternative? Silence. He glanced at his watch. The big international investor call was due in 3 hours. They were supposed to unveil the flagship prototype. Now the prototype sat locked in a frozen loop, because none of the brightest minds he had paid fortunes for could figure out what had gone wrong. Outside the glass wall, a quiet shuffle of footsteps broke the heavy silence. Nobody noticed at first. Everyone's eyes were glued to the data, the graphs, the contracts that would slip through their fingers if they failed tonight. The footsteps stopped at the threshold, where a slim woman stood half hidden behind a small boy, holding a bright plastic toy truck. Clara Thompson, 29. Technically just the live-in nanny on Benjamin's payroll, hired when his sister passed, and left behind a 5-year-old boy named Oliver who now tugged at her hand. She had no badge to enter this restricted level, but security had waved her through when they saw the child assuming a family exception. Clara knew she should not be here, but Oliver had woken with a nightmare asking for his uncle, the man who rarely saw daylight outside meetings like this. The boy's tiny voice echoed when everyone else finally paused to see what the interruption was. "Uncle Ben, can I stay here? My truck is broken." Benjamin turned his head slightly, his eyes softening for just a fraction of a second when he looked at the boy. "Not now, Ollie. Go back upstairs with Clara. We're busy." The child pouted and held up the broken toy. It was just a cheap plastic truck wheels falling off a mess of mismatched screws Clara had tried to fix with tape. But in the boy's small hands, it looked like a missing piece of his courage tonight. One of the engineers sighed loudly. "Security, please." "We can't have them here." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady but gentle. "He just wants to see you for a minute. It will help him sleep." Benjamin looked at the stressed faces around the table, then at the child who now clutched his pant leg. "Fine. 2 minutes, not more." He stooped down awkwardly, smoothing the boy's hair while the teams resumed their frantic debate over error logs and code snippets. Ollie pushed the broken truck into his uncle's hand. "It goes backward, not forward anymore." Benjamin half listened as he turned the toy over. The broken axle spun freely, unbalanced. The nanny crouched beside him, showing Oliver how to hold the toy so it wouldn't lose its wheels completely. Then she looked up, eyes flicking to the screens behind the CEO. Clara's gaze lingered there just long enough for Benjamin to notice. He followed her line of sight. She was staring at the error loop like it was another household puzzle, the same way she once fixed the boy's toy chest latch with a paperclip when maintenance failed to show. Benjamin felt a flicker of something. Annoyance. Curiosity. He stood and handed the truck back to Oliver. "Go on, little man. Clara will help you fix it tomorrow." As the boy turned away, Clara's eyes met Benjamin's. Her mouth opened hesitant, as if she wanted to say something but thought better of it. But the CEO, sharp and starved for any sign of hope, caught the hesitation. What he asked her voice like a quiet order. Clara looked around at the army of experts who now glared at her like she was tracking dirt onto a pristine lab floor. She cleared her throat. It might not be my place, but that loop on the screen. It looks like the same backward spin this toy makes when the axle isn't aligned. A snort came from the far end of the table. One of the senior engineers chuckled dismissive. We have 7 expert teams here, and now the nanny wants to talk about axles. Benjamin held up a hand. The room fell silent again, the tension thick enough to cut. Explain, Clara. Quickly. And with that one word, the entire course of the night began to shift, because sometimes the right solution hides inside a broken toy held by a little boy who just needed his uncle to listen. Clara Thompson had never planned to stand in a room filled with million-dollar consultants and argue about systems she was never trained to touch. By the time she was 22, her life plan had been rewritten so many times she stopped pretending she controlled it at all. She was supposed to be finishing her mechanical engineering degree when her father had his first stroke. By the second one, she was working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, and her younger sister in high school. The degree stayed half-finished, boxed up in unpaid tuition notices and old notebooks now gathering dust in her mother's attic. When her father passed away, Clara didn't return to class. She went to work until the day she answered a notice for a live-in nanny position in the city. The family was wealthy. The pay was enough to keep sending money to her mother back home. She'd always loved kids. And Oliver, with his shy eyes and gentle questions, was easy to love. The housekeeper once said Clara did more than watch the child. She mended things. Broken toys, leaky faucets, squeaky hinges. She fixed what she could quietly and never expected praise for it. Tonight was no different. If Oliver hadn't had that nightmare, she would still be upstairs waiting in the hallway until he drifted back to sleep. Instead, she found herself standing under the bright white lights of the Innovation Command Center, a borrowed hoodie pulled over her pajamas with Oliver's broken toy truck clutched in one hand and every sharp eye in the room locked on her. Benjamin Stroud watched her closely. Most people found his stare intimidating, the way his eyes cut through excuses and false bravado. But Clara didn't flinch. She had seen the same look in hospital waiting rooms and creditors' offices in the eyes of people who thought they were untouchable until the world reminded them no one really was. She met his eyes and, without thinking, gestured to the truck in her hand. This axle, she said, lifting the toy for everyone to see, spins backward when the pin here is bent. When the wheel turns the wrong way, the truck won't roll forward. It resists the pull. One of the IT leads scoffed. And you think our multi-layered test loop is stuck because of a toy truck axle? Clara ignored him. She looked at Benjamin instead. It's not the truck, Mr. Stroud. It's the pattern. She stepped closer to the nearest screen, Oliver's toy still in her palm. I've seen the same type of spin in your loop. It looks like your override is pushing commands in the wrong order. The system fights itself. It rolls backward when it should move forward. Another round of nervous chuckles circled the table. Benjamin didn't laugh. He crossed his arms, considering her words with the same quiet calculation he used to dismantle competitors twice his size. How do you know this? Clara shrugged lightly. I don't know your system, but I know how things work when they're forced to run against their own design. That always breaks them faster, like this axle. She twisted the toy wheel to demonstrate the misalignment again. Oliver, oblivious to the room's tension, yawned against her leg. Clara smoothed the boy's hair with her free hand. She should have stopped there. She should have apologized for interrupting and taken Oliver back upstairs. But a part of her, the stubborn part that still remembered late nights, hunched over design sketches and lecture notes, couldn't step away. Maybe Clara said softly, "You're all trying to force this too hard. Maybe it just needs realignment. Reset the pivot point instead of rewriting the entire line." The engineers exchanged tired looks, too polite to roll their eyes openly. But Benjamin's next words stunned them silent. "Show me." Clara blinked. "Sir, I show me," he repeated, his voice calm but final. Clara looked at the boy, now half asleep against her hip. Then she looked back at Benjamin, nodded once, and stepped forward. For the first time in years, she would trust that the mind she thought was wasted on bedtime stories and broken hinges might still be worth something. And behind her, Oliver's tiny hand clutched the edge of her shirt like he already knew his nanny could fix what no one else could. The hush in the control room felt heavier than the banks of servers humming along the glass walls. Clara could feel every eye tracing her movements as she placed the toy truck carefully on the corner of the long command desk. Her hands trembled a little, part nerves, part the cold air blasting through the vents overhead, but her voice stayed even when she asked for a keyboard. One of the lead technicians, a woman in a blazer with expensive glasses, stepped forward like she might object. Benjamin shot her a look that cut her protest off mid-breath. Without another word, the woman nudged the wireless keyboard across the table to Clara. The moment the keys touched her fingers, something old and half-forgotten snapped awake. She could almost hear her old professor's voice, see the scribbled notes she used to trade for leftover cafeteria sandwiches, all of it bubbling up in the lines of code she now skimmed faster than the blinking cursors could keep up. Behind her, someone whispered, "This is a liability nightmare. We don't even know if she's certified." Clara pretended she didn't hear it. Her eyes flicked over the loop logs, the error logs, the redundant fail-safes stacked like bricks in a wall. No one seemed able to break through. In her mind, she laid them out side by side. Misaligned gears, backward pins, counterweight axles. It was all the same. Machines hated contradiction. So did people. But unlike people, machines always told you exactly where they hurt if you knew how to listen. Benjamin moved to stand near her shoulder. He didn't interrupt. He didn't hover either. He simply watched the lines of code scroll, and the faint crease between his brows eased every time Clara muttered something under her breath that sounded less like self-doubt and more like quiet discovery. After 10 minutes, the technician with the blazer lost her patience. "This is reckless. We have procedures. She's not on the team. She doesn't even—" Benjamin cut her off with a gesture so small it felt like a thunderclap. When he spoke, his tone carried the kind of finality that made grown men resign without argument. "Do you see anyone else fixing it?" he asked, his voice calm, but the warning was clear. "If you do, you're free to step up." Silence answered him. Clara kept typing. She found the pivot buried under 3 override redundancies. No wonder they couldn't brute force it back into submission. It was like trying to turn a river with a straw broom. The system needed a soft nudge, not another bulldozer. Her hands paused, fingers hovering over the enter key. If she was wrong, this would force a partial shutdown for hours, time no one here seemed willing to lose. But if she was right, it would take less than a heartbeat to settle the conflict. Clara glanced at Benjamin. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His nod was enough. She tapped enter. For a split second, every monitor in the room went black. The hush turned into a collective held breath. Then, one by one, the screens flickered back to life. The red error bars vanished, replaced by the steady pulse of green status lines sliding into place like puzzle pieces. The main display showed an unbroken data stream. No forced loops, no reversals, just forward motion, clean and precise. One of the senior developers stared at his tablet like he'd never seen it work before. "How did you—" he started, but Clara cut him off with a tired shrug. "You had it spinning backward. I just flipped the anchor, like the truck axle." "Simple." "Simple," she said, but when she looked at Benjamin, she could see in his eyes that he knew it was anything but. The technician with the blazer pressed her lips into a thin, sour line. "This changes nothing. She's still a domestic worker." "We can't just—" Benjamin's voice sliced through her again. "What she is the only reason you all still have a job tomorrow. Remember that." Clara took a step back, suddenly aware of the weight of Oliver's head against her hip. The boy hadn't stirred, oblivious to the hush that now brimmed with more questions than answers. She bent to shift him to her other side, the familiar routine grounding her when the adrenaline began to drain. One of the IT leads, a man who'd been the loudest skeptic earlier, tried to salvage his dignity. "Lucky guess," he muttered under his breath, half to himself. Clara turned to him, her voice calm, but sharp enough to sting. "Lucky guesses don't fix broken pivots. If you'd like, I can show you the anchor path. Maybe next time you won't spend 12 hours forcing the wrong reset." Benjamin didn't bother to hide his grin. He stepped forward, his polished shoes silent on the glass floor. "Thank you, Clara. His words caught her off guard. She couldn't remember the last time someone in a suit had thanked her for anything more than bringing coffee. She opened her mouth to deflect, but Benjamin raised a hand. No false modesty. You saved us tonight, and you did it with a child's toy and more sense than 7 expert teams combined. She nodded, unsure what to do with the quiet swell of pride she felt under her ribs. It wasn't about the praise. It was about knowing she hadn't wasted all those late nights studying diagrams under a single dim lamp while her father lay in the next room fighting for breath. Maybe that knowledge still had a place in her life. The technician finally stepped aside, defeated for now, but clearly simmering with resentment. Benjamin ignored her. His attention stayed locked on Clara and the boy, now curled tighter into her side. "Do you have time to talk tomorrow?" Benjamin asked. Clara blinked. "About what?" "About how I can keep you from being wasted as a ghost in this house. About how someone who can solve what 7 teams failed to crack shouldn't be scrubbing fingerprints off glass doors." Clara felt Oliver stir, mumbling softly. She smoothed his hair, her heart too full of exhaustion and disbelief to answer properly. "Tomorrow," she said quietly. She met Benjamin's gaze steady now, despite the thrum of leftover nerves. "Tomorrow is fine." When she left the command room, the hush followed her. This time it wasn't contempt that filled the silence behind her. It was something closer to respect, tinged with curiosity, edged with the unsettling fear that the smartest person in the building might just be the one they'd been trained to overlook. In her small bedroom later, as she laid Oliver down and tucked the blanket around him, Clara caught her own reflection in the dark window. She didn't look like a savior or a genius. She looked like a woman in an old hoodie and fraying slippers. But under the borrowed fabric, her mind was alive again, humming with possibility she'd almost forgotten she could trust. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself as she switched off the lamp, let them come with questions. She'd bring her answers and her own terms. Morning came too soon. Clara barely slept, jolting awake every time Oliver turned in his blanket. When dawn finally slipped through the thin curtains, she found him already sitting up, toy truck in hand, humming to himself like the world hadn't tilted overnight. She watched him for a moment, letting the warmth of that small, ordinary scene push away the weight in her chest. Downstairs, the estate buzzed differently. The same suits from last night moved briskly through the marble halls, but their sideways glances weren't tinted with scorn anymore. Whispers followed her as she guided Oliver to the kitchen for breakfast, respectful this time, but sharp with questions. She ignored them all. Benjamin was waiting for her near the grand dining table alone, except for a single cup of black coffee and a folder so thin it looked like it held secrets instead of paper. He looked less immaculate today, sleeves rolled, hair slightly out of place. She wondered if he'd slept at all. Clara settled Oliver at the far end with a bowl of cereal and turned to face him. "You wanted to talk?" Benjamin gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit, please." She hesitated, but curiosity outweighed her caution. She perched on the edge, hands folded tight in her lap. Benjamin slid the folder toward her. "I want to make this official," he said. "Last night wasn't a fluke. I know talent when I see it, and I know when it's being wasted." Clara raised an eyebrow, opening the folder. Inside, crisp pages outlined a consulting contract, temporary, but generous, the kind of number that could wipe out her debts and leave room for Oliver's future too. "I don't need charity," she said, her voice steady. Benjamin shook his head. "This isn't charity. This is common sense. You fixed a crisis my best people couldn't touch. I want you on my advisory team, technical, structural, whatever you're willing to handle." Clara traced the neat lines of text with her thumb. A contract. Her name in ink, a door swinging open that she hadn't even dared to knock on for years. "What about the staff policy?" she asked softly. "The rule about boundaries. You said it yourself, I'm invisible. A nanny, not an asset." Benjamin leaned back, studying her. "Rules change when survival's at stake. I'm not asking you to wear a suit or sit in a boardroom. I'm asking you to keep doing what you did, see what we don't, fix what we break." Part of her wanted to sign that moment. Another part hesitated, glancing at Oliver, who was now trying to balance his toy truck on the rim of his cereal bowl. "Say yes," Benjamin said, softer now. "You'd still keep your schedule, your boy, your space. Just officially use that mind of yours when I need it." She looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the crisp collar and the practiced calm, she saw a man who had built his power on precision and control. And yet here he was, offering her both trust and trouble in equal measure. "I'll think about it," Clara said. She closed the folder gently. "No promises." Benjamin smiled, almost rueful. "That's more than I expected." She stood gathering Oliver before he could drop milk on the polished floor. As she turned to leave, Benjamin's voice followed her. "Oh, and Clara." She paused. "I meant what I said last night. No more hiding. Not if you don't want to." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The new day should have felt like a win. But the moment Clara stepped outside with Oliver for their morning walk, the shift in the air chilled her optimism. Two black sedans sat idle at the far end of the circular driveway, engines low and steady. Near the garden gate she saw men she didn't recognize, too polished, too stiff to be groundskeepers or estate drivers. When she came back inside later, Mrs. Holloway, the house manager, waited in the hallway with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. She gestured for Clara to follow her to the small staff office near the laundry wing. Clara obeyed, heart tapping a warning in her chest. Inside, the older woman's voice was syrup smooth but sharp at the edges. "We're grateful for what you did, Clara, truly. But don't forget your place. The master may see potential in you now, but not everyone thinks this arrangement is wise." Clara folded her arms. "Arrangement you. Meddling where you don't belong. The rest of the staff talk, you know. They wonder why a nanny's name is on a security log next to an override key." Clara held her ground. "I did what no one else could. If that's a problem, maybe they should ask themselves why." Mrs. Holloway's smile hardened. "Pride doesn't suit your position. Neither does ambition. Be careful. The higher you reach, the harder the fall, and there are people here who would be glad to watch you trip." For a heartbeat, Clara saw her father again, told to hush, to bow, to never hope too big, because men in tailored suits didn't like being shown up by those who swept their floors. She stepped closer, her voice a low promise. "Tell them if they want me gone, they can do better. Or they can live with what I fix for them. Either way, I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty." Mrs. Holloway's mouth twitched, but she didn't argue. Clara left first, back straight, Oliver's small hand tight in hers. That night in the quiet of her room, Clara read the contract again by lamplight. She knew Benjamin's offer would come with strings, envy, sabotage, resentment she'd have to carve through with nothing but her stubbornness and an old code of logic learned under borrowed blankets. But as Oliver slept, his toy truck parked beside his pillow, Clara understood something simple and fierce. She'd been invisible for too long. If they wanted to test how far a nanny could climb, she'd show them. One line in the contract caught her eye, her name typed next to words she never imagined seeing again: technical consultant. The beginning of something she hadn't dared dream about since her father's last breath. A small smile tugged at her lips. Let them come. Let them whisper. She'd earned her place. And this time she wouldn't give it up for anyone. Before Clara could sign her name on that contract, the ghosts of her past came knocking in her dreams. That night she lay awake long after the house fell silent. Outside her window, the estate gardens glowed faintly under the moon. Oliver slept beside her, one tiny foot poking out from under the blanket, his toy truck tucked safely near his pillow. Clara watched the gentle rise and fall of his breathing, counting each one until the numbers blurred into memories. She was 16 again, sitting cross-legged on the faded carpet of their cramped apartment. Her father, Emilio Alvarez, hunched over a battered laptop on the kitchen table, his broad shoulders tense beneath a threadbare work shirt. He'd just come home from another 12-hour shift fixing elevators downtown, but his eyes sparkled with an idea too stubborn to die with fatigue. "Come here, Clary," he'd called, tapping the screen. "See this? If they did the circuit this way, they'd save half the power load. But they don't listen to janitors with ideas. So we design it ourselves, yeah. He'd winked at her then as if father and daughter could outsmart the world together. She remembered tracing her fingers over his penciled sketches on cheap paper napkins, the smell of burnt coffee and metal dust clinging to him like a badge of hidden brilliance. They spent weekends like that, her father muttering about load balance and microchips while she fed him ideas between homework assignments. He taught her to solder wires before he taught her to drive. He told her the only thing more dangerous than broken machinery was a broken promise. One night she'd found him slumped over the kitchen table, palms stained with ink and oil. He looked at her with weary pride. "Clary promised me something. Don't ever tuck your mind away just because someone says you should." She had promised, but 2 months later he was gone, struck down by a heart attack that came too early, too fierce, leaving Clara and her mother with unpaid bills, eviction notices, and a silence that ate through every corner of their home. Clara's mother, Rosa, had tried her best cleaning houses all day, sewing clothes at night, always whispering to Clara to keep your head down, mija, don't draw trouble. So, Clara did just that. She buried her father's tools in a shoebox at the back of her closet. She said yes to small jobs, ignored the itch in her brain when she saw something broken that she knew she could fix. When she got pregnant with Oliver at 21, the last scraps of her big dreams shrank into the tight circle of survival. A nanny job was steady, safe, invisible. She told herself it was enough, until last night proved it never really was. A soft knock pulled her from the ache of memory. Clara sat up, pulse spiking, until she realized it was Benjamin's shadow outside her open door. She rose quietly, slipping into the hallway so she wouldn't wake Oliver. Benjamin leaned against the wall, his tie-undone hair still damp from a late shower. He looked younger this way, stripped of his armor. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Couldn't stop thinking," she replied. He studied her face, the exhaustion there that matched his own. "About the contract." She nodded. "About whether signing it means breaking a promise I made a long time ago." Benjamin tilted his head. "What promise?" Clara hesitated, the words tasting fragile after years of silence. "That I wouldn't waste what my father gave me. He taught me everything, how to see the gaps, how to trust that my brain mattered, even if my hands were dirty." Benjamin's eyes softened, and for a moment she didn't see a billionaire, just a man who understood what it meant to inherit ghosts. "Do you think he'd want you to stay hidden?" he asked gently. She laughed, bitter and quiet. "No. He'd hate that I let fear decide for me, but I have Oliver now. I can't risk him getting dragged into this mess." Benjamin stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "This isn't charity, Clara. It's recognition. You have a gift. You shouldn't bury it just because the world tells you to stay small." She met his gaze, searching for the catch, the trick. But all she saw was an odd, fierce belief, a mirror of her father's face for the briefest heartbeat. "You don't know how messy this can get," she said. "Then let it get messy," Benjamin murmured. "I've built empires on messes. I can build another, but I can't build it blind." They stood there in the dim hallway, neither willing to break the silence first. Then Clara let out a long, shaky breath and offered a truth she hadn't spoken aloud in years. "My father died believing people like him would never be heard. If I sign this, if I step up, I have to do it my way, on my terms. No polished speeches, no perfect suits." Benjamin's mouth curved into the barest hint of a smile. "Good. I prefer the way you do things." In the silence that followed, Clara heard her father's voice in the back of her mind, scrappy proud, echoing through the years. "Don't tuck your mind away, Clary." She didn't answer Benjamin that night. She just went back to Oliver's room, brushed a kiss over her son's forehead, and laid the folder on her nightstand like a promise, half fulfilled. When dawn came again, she knew what she had to do. Clara signed the contract the next morning. No lawyers, no witnesses, just her signature on thick, creamy paper and Benjamin's quiet nod of approval. He didn't smile, not really. He just looked at her like he'd finally secured something he'd been hunting for, longer than she could guess. The next few weeks unfolded like a dream. She was no longer just the nanny who mended scraped knees and organized toy boxes. She had an official title now, Innovation Liaison, Benjamin called it. Clara laughed when she saw it printed on the door of a tiny corner office near the estate's garage. But when she stepped inside that small space and unpacked her father's old soldering kit from her bag, the laughter faded into something stronger purpose. She worked long nights sketching on giant whiteboards while Oliver played with toy trucks on the carpet beside her. She rewired prototype parts no one else had dared to touch, whispering explanations to Oliver, as if he could understand the magic in circuits and switches. He liked handing her the right screwdrivers, announcing "Mama, fix it," with the fierce pride only a 4-year-old could muster. Benjamin checked in daily, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with new data to pore over. Sometimes he just stood in the doorway watching her work as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. One Friday evening he stayed longer than usual. Clara was hunched over the disassembled chassis of the security module that had failed weeks ago. She felt his eyes on her as she coaxed a new connection into place, using a spare part from Oliver's broken toy helicopter. "You know," Benjamin said softly, "I've spent years paying top dollar for men in suits who could never do what you're doing right now with a plastic propeller." Clara smiled, tightening the last bolt. "Maybe you were just asking the wrong people." His laughter was low, warm. "Maybe I was." He left her there with a promise, "I'll handle the board. I'll handle the press. You just build." And she believed him. By Monday, word of her miracle fix had spread beyond the estate. One of Benjamin's lead engineers, a graying man named Pierce, had accidentally mentioned her redesign during a briefing with investors. Overnight, Clara's name was whispered in the same breath as breakthrough tech and cost-saving genius. Articles popped up on niche blogs calling her the nanny with a blueprint. A photo of her soldering circuits with Oliver on her lap made its way to a tech subreddit captioned, "Innovation looks like this." Clara didn't care much for attention, but she cared about the idea that her father's way of seeing the world, patchwork, scrappy, brilliant, might finally matter. She told herself it was worth the risk. Then came the meeting. The one that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday when Benjamin summoned her to the glass conference room at the center of his city tower. She hated those sterile skyscraper floors, all polished chrome and hush-hush security. Oliver stayed home with Mrs. Kwan, the kind neighbor Clara trusted with her entire heart. Inside the room, Benjamin waited alone. No lawyers, no Pierce, just him, and a single file folder spread open on the sleek table. He gestured for her to sit. Clara perched on the edge of the leather chair. The rain drummed steadily against the windows behind him. "You look nervous," he said, his tone oddly gentle. "I'm not used to glass boxes and city lights," she murmured. Benjamin gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Neither am I most days." He flipped the folder toward her. Her own sketches stared back, her diagrams, her messy handwritten notes, her father's old circuit logic traced in bright red ink. "These are good," he said. "They're too good, actually." She frowned. "I thought that was the point." "It is. But I'm getting calls, Clara. Big ones. Investors want in. Partners want a cut. And the board," he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The board wants reassurance that you're, how did they put it, reliable and contained." Clara bristled. "Contained. It's how they see it." He paused, then leaned forward. "Look, I need you to sign a secondary agreement. Nothing complicated. Just clarifies that all your designs, every idea, past, present, future, belong solely to the company." Clara stared at the paper sliding toward her. The words blurred around the edges. "That wasn't in the first contract." Benjamin's gaze didn't waver. "No. But this is how these things work, Clara. We protect the asset. You protect yourself." Her throat tightened. "And if I don't sign?" He exhaled. "Then the board could make things difficult. They might block production. They could question your legal standing. Your visa. I was born here. You know what I mean. They'll dig for anything that looks like leverage. I'm trying to keep this clean." He spoke like a man reading from a script someone else wrote. The man who'd once stood in her hallway telling her to let it get messy was gone, replaced by a cautious CEO shielding himself from boardroom sharks. Clara pushed the paper back. You don't need my signature for ideas I've already shared. You have the files, the blueprints. Why do you need this? Benjamin's voice was so quiet she almost didn't catch it. Because once you sign this, they can't come after you. Or, Clara said, her voice cracking, they can come for me whenever they want because then they own me. He didn't deny it. And that was the worst part. She rose, heart hammering so hard she could taste it in her mouth. My father died trying to give me a mind of my own. I won't bury it in your vault. Clara, no. I'll finish the work I promised. But I'm not signing myself away. Not for you. Not for them. For a long moment neither spoke. Outside the rain hit harder, like the sky itself was reminding her how cold glass towers could be. Finally, Benjamin's voice broke the quiet. Then be careful, Clara. If you won't protect yourself with me, they'll find another way. She met his eyes, and for the first time since they'd met, she felt no pull toward him. Just a hollow echo of trust slipping through her fingers. She walked out of that tower into the pouring rain with nothing but a battered bag on her shoulder and the faintest hope that she still had the courage to fight. Clara barely slept that night. She sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, blueprint pages spread around her like a paper moat. Outside, the streetlights flickered. Inside, Oliver's quiet breathing drifted from the bedroom. Her mind spun. She had always believed if you worked hard enough, stayed honest enough, you'd be safe from the shadows that swallowed her father's dreams. But tonight, she understood the truth. Genius was currency for powerful men, and loyalty meant nothing if it couldn't be bought. At dawn, she called Mrs. Kwan and asked if Oliver could stay another day. The older woman heard the strain in Clara's voice and didn't ask questions, just said, "Of course, darling, bring him over," in the soft way that made Clara's eyes sting. By 8 a.m., Clara was at the gates of the estate. A guard she didn't recognize tried to stop her, but she pushed past him, her employee badge long forgotten at the bottom of her bag. She found Benjamin in the West Wing surrounded by men in tailored suits she'd never seen before. When she walked in, they paused mid-sentence. Benjamin's eyes flickered from the investors to Clara. She didn't wait for an invitation. "We need to talk. Now." One man in a gray suit scoffed. "Miss, this is a private out," Benjamin said. His tone sliced through the marble-cold room. The men exchanged looks but obeyed, gathering their files and muttering about unprofessional nonsense. When they were gone, Clara stepped closer, close enough to see how tired Benjamin looked. More lines around his eyes, hair mussed like he hadn't slept either. "You want to say something?" he asked, voice low. Clara dropped a folder onto the polished table between them. Inside were copies of every blueprint, every revised circuit diagram, every page she'd pulled from her father's old notebooks. She had stayed up all night scanning, printing, making sure she could leave something behind if she had to run. "These," she said, tapping the folder, "are not yours alone. They are mine. They are my father's, and I know exactly how much they're worth now." Benjamin didn't flinch. "You should be careful waving that around." She ignored him. "I'm not signing your new contract, and if the board tries to bury me, I will take these public. All of it. I'll tell every investor exactly who really fixed their billion-dollar failure." Benjamin's eyes narrowed. "You'd ruin us both." Maybe Clara said. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "But I'd rather burn everything to the ground than spend the rest of my life cleaning up after men who only know how to own and control." He stepped forward. For a moment, Clara saw the man who had watched her solder toy pieces back into brilliance under soft lamplight. The man who had asked, "What else do you see, Clara, like?" He meant it. But that man was gone again, replaced by the mask he wore for every boardroom shark. "You're bluffing," he said softly. "You won't risk Oliver." Her jaw clenched. "Don't you dare say his name like it's leverage." Benjamin's shoulders stiffened. He turned away from her, staring out at the wide lawn slick with morning frost. "I was trying to protect you," he murmured. "No," she said. "You were trying to protect yourself." The door creaked open behind them. Pierce stepped in without knocking, face pale. He held up a phone. Ben, Mr. Holloway, we have a problem. Benjamin turned, his tone clipped. Not now. You'll want to see this, Pierce said, shoving the phone toward him. Benjamin's eyes darted across the screen. Clara moved closer and saw what he saw. News headlines, screenshots of her Reddit post. She hadn't posted anything, but someone had. The nanny who outsmarted a billionaire's entire team. Photos of her tiny office, the soldering iron, Oliver holding the toy plane that had inspired the fix. Clara's stomach dropped. I didn't leak this. Pierce cleared his throat awkwardly. It wasn't you. The intern who took photos of you working with Oliver, he uploaded them last night. It's all over now. Investors, press. Everyone knows. The silence that filled the room buzzed with more danger than any threat Benjamin could make. He looked at her like she was something volatile, something unmanageable. You just made yourself the story, he said coldly. You have no idea what that means. Oh, I do, Clara said. It means if you want to bury me, you'll have to do it in public. And good luck spinning that. By noon, Clara was gone from the estate. She packed only what she could carry: her father's soldering kit, Oliver's favorite stuffed rabbit, the hard drive with every blueprint she'd ever drawn. She didn't know where they'd go yet, only that they wouldn't stay in a city that had decided her genius belonged to someone else. Outside the gates, a black car pulled up. Mrs. Kwan leaned out the window. Get in, dear. And buckle Oliver tight. The world's going to try to knock you around, but not today. In the back seat, Oliver crawled into her lap, sleepy and warm. She pressed her face into his hair and breathed in the soft smell of him, letting it steady her. By evening, Benjamin stood alone in his office, staring at the contract Clara refused to sign. On his desk sat the children's toy that had started all of this: Oliver's plastic plane, its propeller still spinning because she'd mended it better than new. Pierce hovered nearby, voice hesitant. We can get injunctions. Suppress the leaks. Spin the narrative, Benjamin cut him off. It won't work. She's smarter than they'll ever be. Smarter than me. Pierce said nothing. He knew better. Benjamin sank into his chair, exhaustion heavy in his bones. For a long time he said nothing. Then he reached for his phone and opened a blank message. Clara, he typed, then deleted it. Typed again. Clara, I'm sorry. You were never just the nanny. You were everything I should have listened to from the start. He hovered over the send button, but in the end he didn't send it. He knew some debts couldn't be paid off. Some apologies couldn't be folded into tidy contracts. Back in Mrs. Kwan's small apartment, Clara lay curled beside Oliver on a makeshift bed. She stared at the ceiling while the city hummed outside, the weight of possibility pressing down like a storm she refused to run from this time. She didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but she knew she'd face it on her own terms. Not as a piece of property, not as a signature on a page, not as a miracle someone else could claim, but as Clara Quinn, daughter of a man who taught her to fix what others abandoned. Mother of a boy who believed she could fix anything, even a broken promise. And maybe, just maybe, the woman who would show the world how dangerous a mind could be when it refused to be owned. 3 weeks later, the headlines had shifted. The billion-dollar fix that once threatened to bury Clara had become the story of the century. News outlets scrambled to get her side. Talk shows offered paid interviews. Tech blogs argued about whether Benjamin Holloway's empire would collapse under the weight of public outrage. Clara ignored them all. She spent the first week just trying to sleep through the nights. She cooked simple meals with Mrs. Kwan, read bedtime stories to Oliver twice over, and sat by the window each evening watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Every day another lawyer called offering to represent her interests. Every day she said no. She wanted no more contracts, no more signatures on papers that turned her into someone else's leverage. But the world didn't stop knocking. One morning, Mrs. Kwan handed her an envelope, no name on it, just a company logo she knew too well, Holloway Group. Inside was a simple letter in Benjamin's tight, precise handwriting. Clara, the board wants to erase you. I've done what I can to stop them, but you know how they work. I know you won't accept my help, So I did the only thing I could do. I stepped down. The project is yours. Do with it what you want. Build it, break it, share it. Just promise me you'll protect what made it matter in the first place. Tell Oliver. Tell him thank you. Benjamin. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and put it away. She didn't feel triumph, just a quiet sadness for a man who had only just learned how to step aside when it was too late to fix what he'd broken. On a rainy Wednesday, Clara and Oliver sat at a battered library table. Around them, the hum of old radiators and soft turning pages drowned out the city's roar. Oliver traced crayon lines on a blank page, drawing new shapes she guessed were half robots, half dragons. Clara flipped through an old engineering journal she'd borrowed years ago, her father's name scribbled in faded ink on the inside cover. When Oliver looked up, his eyes were bright. "Mom, are you sad?" She shook her head and kissed his forehead. "No, baby. Just thinking." "About Mr. Ben." Clara exhaled. Oliver always knew more than he should. A little, but mostly about what comes next. He held up his drawing, a scribbled spaceship with gears and stars. "Can we build this?" Clara laughed softly. "Someday maybe we will." That night, after Oliver fell asleep, curled up under Mrs. Kwan's crocheted blanket, Clara made tea and sat across from her old neighbor. Mrs. Kwan poured them both a cup. "So what will you do now, Clara? You can't stay hidden forever." Clara stirred her tea in slow circles. "They want me to speak, to write articles, give interviews. But that's not who I am." Mrs. Kwan raised an eyebrow. "Then who are you?" Clara thought about her father's workshop, the smell of solder and oil, the way he'd look at broken things not as failures but as puzzles begging for new life. "I'm someone who fixes things," she said, "so I'll keep doing that. But on my terms." 2 weeks later, Clara stood in front of a tired brick building in a neighborhood that people forgot existed between glass towers and neon billboards. A small sign in the dusty window read, "For lease." Inside, the floors were scuffed, the walls needed paint, the roof leaked in 3 corners. But the space had wide tables and old shelves strong enough to hold a generation's worth of scrap metal circuit boards and blueprints waiting to be born. Oliver ran from room to room, his voice echoing like hope itself. Clara signed the lease that same afternoon. No investors, no shareholders, just her name small but real at the bottom of the page. She named it The Workshop, just that. No flashy branding, no hollow slogans. A place for kids with big eyes and tired parents, for teenagers who couldn't afford fancy labs, for women who wanted to learn to solder instead of serve coffee to men who never remembered their names. A place where broken things machines, dreams people could be mended piece by piece. Word spread fast, the way good secrets always do. Mrs. Kwan brought leftover soup and fresh flowers for the front desk. Oliver made a cardboard sign that read, "Official Toy Repair Station," taped crooked on the door. On opening day, Clara expected no one. By noon, there were 12 kids, 3 grandfathers, a mother, trying to fix her late husband's radio, and 2 high school girls who wanted to learn how to wire solar panels for their science fair project. Clara showed each of them how to hold a soldering iron like an extension of their fingers. She drew simple schematics on the chalkboard and explained how every wire carried a promise that even the smallest spark could power something bigger than itself. Late that night, after she locked up, Clara and Oliver walked the few blocks home under the city's stubborn glow. He swung his backpack back and forth, humming softly. "Mom, are we rich now?" he asked suddenly. Clara laughed. "Why do you ask?" "Because everyone talks about you like you're super famous. And famous people are rich, right?" Clara crouched to meet his eyes. She thought about Benjamin's empire, the boardrooms, the offer letters still flooding her inbox. Then she thought about the cardboard sign on her new door. "No, Ollie," she said. "We're not rich. But we have enough. And sometimes enough is better." He nodded like this was the best answer he could imagine. He pressed his cold nose against hers and whispered, "I love you, Mom." She whispered it back because she always would. When they reached their small apartment, Clara's phone buzzed. An email. She almost didn't check it, but something made her open it anyway. Subject: a proposal from Benjamin at Holloway Group. Come message. I know you don't owe me anything. I know you probably never want to hear from me again, but I have an idea that could help people, really help people this time. If you ever feel like talking, you know how to find me. If not, I'll stay out of your way. Be well, Clara. She didn't answer. Not yet. Maybe one day, when she knew for certain he had changed for good, they'd build something new together, something better. But that day wasn't today. Tonight was hers, and Oliver's, and the city's too. She turned off her phone and turned out the light. In the quiet dark, Clara let herself believe what her father had always whispered when she lay in his workshop as a child. Nothing is truly broken if you still have your hands, your mind, and the courage to try.